Good afternoon and welcome to the third in our series of CEU lectures. I'm John Shattuck, President and Rector of Central European University, and it's my great privilege throughout this week to host 5 lectures by George Soros, held here in Budapest at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences under the auspices of Central European University. In today's lecture, Mr. Soros will discuss the concept of open society, which guides his philanthropy and is central to his political and social thinking. Over the past quarter century, as we all know, he has devoted unprecedented philanthropic support to the underpinnings of this concept around the world, from equal access to justice to freedom of expression. These lectures are being video conferenced to universities on several continents, creating interactive global audiences of students in real time. Today's lecture will include students from Columbia University in New York, in addition to invited guests and Central European University's students here in Budapest. Our moderator today is Ivan Krastev, an international political commentator and civil society leader from Bulgaria. Mr. Soros will speak for approximately 50 minutes, after which Mr. Krastev will offer his own brief commentary. Mr. Soros will then take questions, as he has in previous days, starting with 3 questions today from our audience at Columbia University and then from the audience here in Budapest. Now, to deliver his third lecture, I'm delighted once again to introduce George Soros, who once again needs no introduction.
Thank you very much. Today, I shall introduce the third pillar of my conceptual framework, namely open society. In the previous lectures, I was summarizing the conclusions of a lifetime of study and experimentation. Here, I will be breaking new ground because my views on open society have changed over time, and they are still evolving. As a result, the next 2 lectures will be much more exploratory in nature. The connection between open society and reflexivity is far from obvious. On a personal level, they are closely connected. As you'll recall, I was studying economics at the LSE, and at the same time, I was reading Karl Popper's Open Society and Its Enemies. And it was Popper's insistence on our inherent fallibility that led me to question the basic assumptions of economic theory and develop the concept of reflexivity. But on a conceptual level, the connection is only indirect. It's the first pillar, the fallibility, that connects the other 2. Fallibility in this context means not only that our view of the world is always incomplete and distorted, but also that in our effort to simplify an extremely complex reality, we often misconstrue it. And our misconceptions play an important role in shaping the course of history. If there is anything really original in my thinking, it's this emphasis on misconceptions. It provides a strong argument in favor of critical thinking and open society. Popper didn't give an exact definition of open society because he considered exact definitions incompatible with our imperfect understanding. He preferred to approach things from the opposite direction by first describing them and then giving them a label. The form of organization he named open society bore a close resemblance to democracy. The net effect of his approach was to justify democracy by an epistemological argument. Since perfect knowledge is beyond the scope of the human intellect, a society characterized by the freedom of speech and thought and free elections is preferable to a society which imposes its ideology by force. Having been exposed to Nazi persecution and communist oppression, I found this argument very persuasive. Popper's philosophy made me more sensitive to the role of misconceptions in financial markets, and the concept of reflexivity allowed me to develop my theory of bubbles. This gave me a leg up as a market participant. After a successful run as a hedge fund manager, I went through a kind of midlife crisis. I was approaching 50. My hedge fund had grown to be 400 million, of which 40 million belonged to me personally. I felt that I had made more than enough money for myself and my family, and running a hedge fund was extremely stressful and depleting. What would make it worthwhile to continue? I thought long and hard, and finally I decided to set up a foundation devoted to the promotion of open society. I defined its mission as opening up closed societies, correcting the deficiencies of open societies, and promoting a critical mode of thinking. As time went by, I became increasingly involved in philanthropy. I established a foundation here in Hungary in 1984, when it was still under communist rule. In China in 1986, in Poland and the Soviet Union in 1987, and as the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia disintegrated, I set up a network of foundations that covered almost the entire former communist world. In this way, I acquired some practical experience in building open societies. I learned a lot. I discovered things that I should have known in the first place. For instance, that the disintegration of closed societies doesn't necessarily lead to the birth of open societies. It may result in just a continuing disintegration until a new regime emerges that bears more resemblance to the regime that had collapsed than to an open society. The event that forced me to thoroughly reconsider the concept of open society was the re-election of President Bush in the United States in 2004. Here was the oldest and most successful democracy in the world, violating the principles for which it was supposed to stand by engaging in human rights violations in the name of fighting a war on terror and invading Iraq on false pretenses. Yet, he was re-elected. How was that possible? I had to ask myself, what was wrong with America? I wrote a couple of books trying to answer that question. I blamed the Bush administration for misleading the people, and I blamed the people for allowing the Bush administration to mislead them. As I probed deeper, I started to question my own conceptual framework. I discovered a flaw in the concept of open society insofar as Popper was mainly concerned with the problems of understanding reality. He put forward an epistemology